Okay, someone please tell me if I'm the crazy one here because I genuinely don't think I am. My apartment, which is supposed to be my sanctuary, currently feels like a morgue where the body is still walking around, pointedly ignoring the cause of death. Cardboard boxes are stacked in precarious towers in the living room, labeled with Max's neat, blocky handwriting. Kitchen, BOOKS, clothes. They're like little brown tombstones marking the death of a friendship. The only sound for the past 48 hours has been that god-awful, nerve-shredding screech of packing tape being ripped from the roll, followed by the dull thud of another box being sealed shut. That's Max, my roommate, or I guess my ex-roommate now. He's leaving, and why? Because I gave him some honest, professional feedback on his latest painting, that's it. I tried talking to him this morning, cornered him by the coffee maker. Max, can we please just talk about this? This is insane. He just looked right through me, not even a flicker of acknowledgement, then picked up his keys and walked out, leaving me standing there feeling like a fool. I was just trying to help him. I used the same language, the same critical framework I paid over 60 grand to learn at a real art college, the kind of critique that separates the hobbyists from the artists. I gave it to him for free, a gift, because I thought we were friends and I wanted to see him improve, to stop him from embarrassing himself. And in return for this act of generosity, I get this melodramatic, suffocating silence. He's treating my words like they were acid, like I personally attacked his soul instead of his brushwork. It's so childish. He's making me feel like a monster, and for what? For telling the truth? For having a trained eye? So you tell me. Am I the asshole for trying to save a friend from creative mediocrity? Because from where I'm standing, it feels like I'm being punished for simply being the better artist, and honestly, it's exhausting. When Max first answered my ad for a roommate a year ago, it felt like fate. He wasn't just some random guy who could split the rent, he was an aspiring artist. Or, well, that's what he called himself. During his viewing of the apartment, his eyes went wide when he saw my easel and the large canvas I was working on. It was a complex, multi-layered piece, and he just stood there mesmerized. "You're a real artist," he'd breathed out like he was meeting a celebrity. I remember smiling, a little condescendingly perhaps, and saying, "I try to be." He was sold. He practically begged for the room. That's how our dynamic was set from day one. I was the professional, the one who had put in the years of grueling critiques and life drawing classes. He was the wide-eyed amateur, a paralegal by day who dabbled with watercolors in a cheap sketchbook on weekends. He treated my studio corner of the living room like a sacred space. He'd watch me mix my oils, asking timid questions about color theory and composition, hanging on my every word. It was flattering, I'll admit. It felt right. He saw the hierarchy clearly. In the beginning, he'd sometimes get a burst of courage and show me one of his pieces. They were fine. For a hobbyist, lots of earnest, colorful landscapes that looked like something you'd see at a suburban art fair. I'd offer a few gentle pointers. You might want to study atmospheric perspective, or your understanding of light source is a bit inconsistent, and he'd nod eagerly, but I could see the disappointment in his face. He wasn't just looking for feedback. He was looking for my approval, my validation that he was on the same path as me. After a couple of those interactions, he stopped showing me his work altogether. He'd just scurry past my easel to his room, sketchbook clutched to his chest like a state secret. I figured he finally understood the vast gulf between us and was wisely choosing to practice in private until he had something worthy of my time. He put me on this pedestal, you see. I wasn't just his roommate Kayla, I was the artist. I was the living embodiment of the life he dreamed of but didn't have the guts or the talent to pursue seriously. He'd bring me coffee when I was pulling an all-nighter before a gallery submission. He'd praise my most minor accomplishments as if I'd just won the Turner Prize. He saw me as his guide, his North Star, and I accepted that role. Why wouldn't I? It was the truth of our situation. He needed my expertise, my vision. He projected all his artistic hopes and dreams onto me, and I wore them. It was the foundation of our entire friendship. The whole thing blew up last Thursday. It was supposed to be a casual night, a perfect blend of our two worlds. I'd invited Rowan and Priya, my friends from art college, people who speak my language, who understand that criticism is a gift. Max had a couple of his paralegal friends over, Dave and Sarah, who are perfectly nice but think Thomas Kincaid is a genius. We were all in the living room, drinking that cheap but surprisingly decent red wine Dave brought, laughing about some stupid reality show. The vibe was light, easy, and then Max did it. He'd been quiet for the last 10 minutes, fidgeting with his glass, and I saw him take a deep breath like a man about to confess a crime. "Guys," he announced, his voice a little too loud, cracking just a bit. I have something I want to show you if that's okay." A nervous energy immediately filled the space. He disappeared into his bedroom and came back out holding a square canvas, holding it by the edges like it was a sacred artifact. It was a portrait, a major departure from his usual timid landscapes. It was an old man on a park bench, and my first thought was that the color was completely out of control, almost violently vibrant. He propped it up against a bookshelf, his hands visibly shaking. "It's the first thing I've felt good enough to finish in months," he said, his eyes darting to me for a nanosecond before flitting away. It's really important to me. I was trying something new with the impasto technique, trying to build up the texture. His friends, bless their ignorant hearts, immediately gushed. "Wow, Max, that's incredible," Dave said, squinting at it like he was at the Louvre. "You're so talented," Sarah chimed in. "Oh, I love the colors, they're so happy." Rowan and Priya, my friends, were more skilled in their diplomacy. "That's a really interesting use of texture, Max," Rowan offered, a perfect noncommittal compliment. "There's a lot of confidence in your brushwork," Priya added. They were trying to be kind, to protect him, but in doing so, they were lying, and I couldn't be a part of that. It would have been a betrayal of everything I stand for. I felt a familiar sense of duty settle over me. This was a teaching moment. I let everyone finish their empty platitudes, took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, and then I stood up and walked over to the painting. "I own the space." "Okay," I began, my voice calm and authoritative, the one I use when I'm breaking down a piece. The room went silent. "Let's actually look at this." I pointed a long, manicured finger at the canvas, stopping just short of touching it. "First off, Max, your impasto is purely decorative, it's not structural. See here." I gestured to a thick glob of yellow paint on the man's face. "This does nothing to define the form of the cheekbone, it just sits there like a gaudy brooch. It's a classic amateur mistake. You're thinking about texture as an afterthought, like sprinkles on a cupcake, not as the flour in the cake itself." I could feel the air in the room crystallize. Max's hopeful smile had completely evaporated. He was just staring at the painting, his face ashen. But I had to push on, he needed to hear this. "And your composition is completely static. The subject is dead center, the most boring, predictable choice you can possibly make. A real artist interrogates their first impulse. And the background," I waved my hand dismissively, "it's a chaotic mess of muddy greens. You haven't established a clear light source, so the shadows on his face are completely arbitrary. This shadow here suggests the light is high and to the left, but this one under his chin suggests it's coming from straight on. It makes no sense. It looks less like he's sitting under a tree and more like he has a bizarre skin disease." Rowan, bless her, tried to intervene. "Kayla, I think the emotional core is really strong." "Emotion doesn't fix bad technique," I cut her off, my voice sharp and final. "That's the whole point. Emotion is the consolation prize for people who can't master the fundamentals. He's asking to be taken seriously as an artist, right? So let's be serious." I turned my focus back to Max, who looked like he'd been physically struck. "Look, I'm not trying to be mean, I'm trying to help you. This is what a real critique sounds like. It's not about oohs and ahs, it's about rigorous deconstruction." Then I had my brilliant idea. I spotted his jar of tools on the side table. I reached over and picked up one of his palette knives, its metal edge cool against my fingers. "Here, it's an easy fix. Let me just show you." I stepped towards his painting. "If you just scrape this part back and redefine this shadow line here, you'd see." I didn't even get to touch the canvas. Don't." The word was a splinter of ice in the hot, awkward room. It wasn't loud, but it cut through everything. He was looking at me now, his eyes dark and completely empty of the admiration I was so used to seeing there. No one breathed, it was brutally, painfully quiet, and all I could think was, wow, he really can't handle the truth. The party died a quick, merciful death after that. Dave and Sarah mumbled something about an early morning and practically ran out the door, shooting Max these pitying looks that made my skin crawl. Rowan and Priya stayed for a few more excruciatingly long minutes, trying to fill the dead air with pointless chatter about an upcoming gallery show. I played along, acting as if nothing had happened, as if the atmosphere in my living room wasn't thick enough to choke on. Max didn't say another word. He just stood by the bookshelf, guarding his painting like a wounded animal. As soon as my friends left, he picked up the canvas. He handled it so gently, with a reverence that seemed utterly absurd given what a technical failure it was. Without looking at me, he turned and walked to his room, closing the door behind him with a soft, final click. The silence he left behind was louder than any argument. It was a solid, physical thing pressing in on me. I waited a few minutes, my irritation growing. This was so childish. I was the one who had just spent my social capital and energy trying to help him, and I was the one being punished with the silent treatment. Unbelievable, I marched over to his door and knocked. Max, are you serious right now? No answer, I knocked again, harder this time. Max, open the door, don't be a baby. I was trying to help you, that's what friends do, we don't let each other fail. The door opened a crack, he was standing there, his face completely blank. I need some space, Kayla. On the base. For what, so you can sulk? I didn't say anything that wasn't true. Do you want to be a hobbyist your whole life, or do you want to be an artist? Because artists have to be able to take criticism. This is how we grow. I tried to peer past him into the room to see what he was doing with the painting. Just let me talk you through the composition again without other people around. You'll see I'm right. I heard you the first time, he said, and his voice was flat. Devoid of any emotion at all, it was more unsettling than if he had yelled. I'm not going to talk about it anymore, I'm tired, good night. And then he closed the door in my face. Not slammed it, just closed it. Firmly. I stood there in the hallway, stunned, the sheer arrogance of it. He was so wrapped up in his own bruised feelings that he couldn't see the favor I was trying to do him. He was choosing his ego over a genuine opportunity to learn. I went to bed fuming, convinced that he'd wake up in the morning, realize how ridiculous he was being, and probably even apologize for his tantrum. I was sure of it, he didn't apologize. The silence from the night before didn't break, it congealed. The entire next day was a masterclass in passive aggression. He was a phantom in our shared space. I heard his alarm, the shower, the front door closing as he left for work, all without a single word exchanged between us. When I got home that evening, he was already there in the kitchen making a sandwich. I decided to be the bigger person, to extend an olive branch. Hey, I said, my voice deliberately cheerful, rough day. He didn't look up from the counter, he just methodically spread mustard on his bread. It was a day. Look, I sighed, leaning against the doorframe. About last night, I get that your feelings were hurt, but you have to see it from my perspective. I can't just lie to you, Max, it would be disrespectful to both you and the craft. He finally looked at me then, but his eyes were like flat gray stones. There was nothing there, no anger, no sadness, just nothing. I'm moving out, he said. The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. What? You're moving out? Are you insane? Over a painting? That's the most ridiculously dramatic thing I've ever heard. I found a place this afternoon, he continued, his voice as steady and unnerving as a flatlining heart monitor. I can be out by Sunday. My disbelief curdled into fury. You're throwing away our friendship, our home, because your ego got a little bruised, because I was honest with you. After all the times I've helped you, all the advice I've given you. That's the thing, Kayla, he said, finally putting the knife down and turning to face me fully. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't even tense, he was just calm, terrifyingly calm. I used to think you were helping me, I put you on a pedestal, I thought you were this brilliant, guiding light. He shook his head, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. But I realized last night, listening to you tear me down in front of my friends, you don't see me as a fellow artist on a journey, you don't even see me as a friend. He paused, and for the first time, a flicker of something raw and painful showed in his eyes. In your world, there's only one real artist in this apartment, and everyone else is just an audience, or a project, or a joke. Your help isn't help, Kayla, it's a performance. It's about proving you're superior, and I can't live with that. I can't create anything in a place where I feel like I'm constantly being graded by someone who has already decided I've failed. He picked up his sandwich and walked past me. I'm not going to argue with you about it, he said over his shoulder. My mind is made up. All my arguments, all my perfectly logical points about technique and professionalism, they just evaporated. They were useless against this final, quiet refusal. He wasn't fighting me, he was just erasing me. The last day was the worst. The apartment felt hollowed out, stripped of his presence even before he was fully gone. The living room was an obstacle course of boxes, and I found myself helping him, mostly out of a desperate need to break the goddamn silence. We moved in a weird, stilted choreography, taping boxes, carrying things to the front door for his friend's truck. He asked me to clear out the shared hall closet to make sure none of my stuff got packed by mistake. It was filled with old coats, a vacuum cleaner, and a few bags of junk we'd been meaning to sort through for months. As I pulled out a dusty bag of old magazines for recycling, I saw it at the bottom of the trash can we kept in there. It was a small, half-finished wooden easel. Not a flimsy, store-bought one, but something made by hand. The wood was a beautiful, warm-toned cherry, sanded down so smooth it felt like silk under my fingertips. It was clearly a work in progress, but the craftsmanship was meticulous. And there, on the side of the main support, was a small, perfectly executed K burned into the wood with a pyrography pen. My breath caught in my throat. I remembered, weeks ago, hearing the sound of sanding and smelling sawdust coming from the small balcony off his room. I'd asked him what he was up to, and he'd just shrugged and said, just a little project. He had been making it for me, this beautiful, thoughtful handmade thing. He had been pouring his time and care into it, probably as a birthday gift or a surprise. And now it was in the trash, discarded. He hadn't just thrown away a piece of wood. He had thrown away the very idea of giving me a gift. He had thrown away the part of him that thought I was worthy of that effort. Holding that abandoned easel, the weight of what I had done finally hit me, not as an intellectual concept, but as a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I hadn't just critiqued his painting. I had taken his hope, his vulnerability, that precious, terrifying moment of sharing something important, and I had smashed it to pieces on the floor to prove a point. I had made his admiration for me feel like a foolish mistake, and this broken gift was the proof. It's been 3 months. The apartment is clean and quiet, exactly how a serious artist's space should be. I have my studio corner back all to myself. The silence that was once so suffocating is now just empty. There's no one to bring me coffee when I'm working late. There's no one to ask timid questions that make me feel smart. There's just me, my canvases, and the low hum of the refrigerator. Sometimes I'll finish a particularly difficult section of a painting, and my first instinct is to turn and say, hey, come look at this, before the silence reminds me there's no one there to look. Of course, I stalk him online. I hate myself for it, but I can't stop. His profile is public now. Last night, I saw a new post that felt like a punch to the gut. It was a photo of him standing in what looked like a small, crowded community gallery. He was beaming, a real unforced smile that reached his eyes. And next to him, hung proudly on the wall, was the painting, the one with the muddy background and the decorative impasto. He was surrounded by a group of people I didn't recognize, all of them smiling, one of them with an arm slung around his shoulder. They looked like they belonged together, they looked happy for him. The caption he wrote underneath destroyed me. It said, my first ever exhibition, over the moon. So grateful to be part of a community that lifts each other up instead of tearing each other down. This is just the beginning. He looked happy, relaxed, confident. He looked like he hadn't thought about me in months. I sat there staring at my phone screen at his smiling face next to his flawed art. I had been so right about everything. I was right about the composition, right about the light source, right about the technique. I had won the argument. I had proven my superior knowledge. But looking at that picture, I realized the crushing truth. My victory was meaningless. He didn't need my approval to be happy. He didn't need my critique to feel like an artist. He just needed to get away from me. He found a new world, a better one, and he seems to be doing just fine. He's moved on. And I'm still here in this perfect, quiet apartment all alone with my victory.